So before we get into the actual project, I wanted to quickly go through the basics of the Procreate interface. So I'm working with an iPad Pro, the 10.5 inch. It's an older model, but I do have the most recent iOS software on it. We are at your main screen of your iPad. Once you turn it on, you can click on your icon wherever it is on your screen. I have it in my docking bar just for ease of use since I use it so often. If we click on it, it'll then pop up the Procreate gallery. So I have a bunch of folders and a bunch of projects. I need to organize this. But when we look at this, my most recent artworks will be at the top, and then what you'll also notice is that I have these things called stacks where it has multiple files kind of organized and lumped together. I tend to organize projects by this. So for example, my kids' projects, prints that I'm working on, sticker pack finals, as well as anything maybe that I'm creating for my YouTube channel and things like that. But like I said, I have to organize mine a bit, so I want to go straight to what I have in my most recent area. And these are the stickers that we're going to be working on today in this class. But before we do that, I want to go over the interface. Once we're in the actual Procreate interface, you'll see you have an upper toolbar and then you have a little slider type toolbar on the left hand side. If we click on gallery, it'll take us back to our gallery. And in the main gallery, you have select, import, photo, and plus. You can select different files and group them together. You can import files from elsewhere in your iPad file system. You can add a photo from your photo roll. And then if you hit the plus button, you can actually create a new canvas. There's all kinds of templated canvases already. I tend to use the 4x6 and the 8x8 a lot, as well as the 4000 by 4000 pixel ones because I'm working with creating surface pattern designs. But for my sticker templates, I tend to use the 4x6 inch one. We're going to go into a most recent artwork though. I utilized the 8.5 by 11. And if we click on it, it'll take us to our main artboard. What you'll see is I have two little squares, which is our layers. If you click on those, it'll show what's on each of those layers. The background color is white here. I wanted to remove it because as you'll see as we move on into the class, once we export these, we want to make sure that they don't have a background layer so that we can load them properly in Procreate or in the Cricut design space. You can add new layers by clicking on the plus. And what's nice with layers is that basically it allows you to create and organize, and it allows you to create a file system and organize your artwork so that it's easier to edit. For the sake of this class, we're going to be working each of the flowers here will have their own layer. What we're looking at is kind of like the final piece before I add our sticker die cut line. But before this, each of these flowers were on their own layers, so it made it easy to edit without having to worry about, ruining or messing up something else in one of the other drawings. But what's nice is with layers is that you can just add these layers and you can draw on top of them and you're not going to mess with any of the other layers. So even though I drew on top of that, it doesn't ruin it because I can just delete that layer. So to delete the layer, what you'll do is you'll drag the layer to the left and then you'll see lock, duplicate, and delete. Lock the layer means you cannot edit it. Duplicate means basically you're creating a copy of it, and then if you delete it, it'll delete the layer. There are also some really nice layer functions in here. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you'll understand them. We won't be using them too much today, but I do want to show that they are in here. If we look at this and you click on that little N, you'll be able to go into the layer menu functions. You can change the opacity, which basically makes things look see-through or makes it darker. You can darken your layers. You can multiply your layer. We will be using multiply, which kind of helps to soften the effects when we're adding some of the texture on top of our drawings. And then there's a bunch of other options here that we're not going to go through today, but I'm hoping to go through in a different class. Now if you click on the little icon with your image in your layers, it'll pop up another additional menu. This is where you can rename your layers. You can also select your layers. You can select multiple layers at a time. You can copy a layer. You can fill your layer with a color. You can use alpha lock and mask, and basically alpha lock allows it so that when you are working on another layer and you want to only edit or adjust or revise colors or shapes within something that you've already drawn, it allows the pixels to stay within whatever is already colored. So if we turn on the alpha lock, we grab, say, this Inca brush, and I want to add a little bit of texture with this green color, I can color on top of it, and only the areas that are colored will be edited. You do want to make sure that when you're working with alpha lock, you're also working with a clipping mask, so you don't edit the original image that you're working on. So what I like to do is when I turn on alpha lock, I'll create a layer above it, and then on that layer I will select clipping mask, and then I can color and add my texture on top versus on the original file. And then if I don't like it, I can just turn it off or delete it. That also brings me to the concept of clipping masks. Clipping masks are very similar to alpha lock. It basically clips down into whatever you're working with in the space below it. I like to use masks all the time when I'm adding texture or when I'm adding shadows so that I don't go outside of the line, so to speak. You can also merge layers together, and you can also reference layers. We will be using the reference option when you're working with line art. If you select reference on your line art layer, it'll allow you to actually reference the lines in there, and then you can drag and drop colors directly from your paint palette. So let's do this as an example. So I'm going to draw a circle really quickly on this new layer using the technical pen, and I have a nice clean line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select reference, and it'll allow me to click on my color icon, and it'll fill the color within the line reference on the artboard. It just makes coloring in a lot quicker. Now, if you like the whole idea of like actually physically coloring your spaces in, like you might do with a coloring book or coloring pencils, then by all means do that. But what I like to do is just make things quicker and then add shadows and effects as I go, just because I think it's a little bit more efficient when I'm coloring this way. So now I want to step outside of the layers. Next, you'll find the eraser icon, and this allows you to erase anything on your layer that you are working with. So you can actually erase with specific brushes. So say you're drawing with a smooth pencil brush, you're going to probably want to erase with a smooth pencil brush so that it looks similar. And then on the left hand side in these sliders, you can change how big the brush size is by dragging that little slider bar up or down. So up makes it larger, down makes it smaller. And then the little arrow below it is your brush opacity, so you can, again, how opaque it is. If you drag it all the way up, it's going to be fully opaque. If you drag it down, it's going to become more see-through. So if we're on this and you use it, and it'll erase whatever you are working on your artboard. And what's nice is with this, because it's on a separate layer, I'm not going to erase what's already on the other layer with the actual artwork. Next to that is the smudge tool. If you take two colors together, we're going to use like a marker brush. Take two colors together, you can actually use the smudge tool to smudge their colors. And again, just like with the eraser tool, you can pick the type of brush that you're going to smudge with, and it'll smudge it together, just kind of like what you might do when you're working with, say for example, like actual paints or something like that. So you can add more paint and then use your smudger and just kind of smudge it, and then you can go back to your eraser and erase it. Now to zoom in, what you'll do is you will take 2 fingers onto your artboard, and then you'll spread them out on the screen and it'll zoom in, and if you bring and drag them back in, it'll zoom back in. If you take 3 fingers and you drag down, you're going to get some additional options. You'll get cut, like you can cut certain areas, copy, copy all, cut and paste, copy and paste, and you can use the little select icon over here in the left hand side. You can select different items. You need to make sure you're on your correct layer though, and you can select different items, and then if you take 3 fingers, drag down, you can cut an item, you can paste an item, you can copy and paste, and it'll give you an additional item. If you take 2 fingers and tap, it'll undo your transform. If you double tap, it'll undo your imported image. If you double tap again, it'll undo what you did prior. Now I want to get into the brushes. This is probably the most raved about part of Procreate, is the brush library. My brush library actually has some imported brushes as well as the brushes that are already included in Procreate. The brushes included in Procreate are fantastic. You really don't need to necessarily purchase any additional ones. A lot of the ones I have in here are freebies from other artists. Some I have purchased, but the library that is included in Procreate is fantastic. And with the most recent update, they added some additional brushes that just really blew me away. They were fantastic. They really do a good job of kind of bringing in traditional, more tactile art, art supplies, so to speak, into this digital world. So you have sketching brushes. My favorites are Peppermint, as well as the 6B and HB pencil and the technical pencil. For inking, this is like the line work that you'll do after you do a sketch. There is the technical pen that I really like a lot, as well as a studio pen if you're going for more of a brush tips type of vibe. Gelsinki ink is really nice, and there's also dry ink and marker, which are good, and ink bleed if you want more of a kind of like thicker, darker, but more pencil-y feel versus like a really fine marker tip. But for this class, we're actually going to be using the technical pen when we outline our work. There's also pens for drawing. These are just a little bit more textured. There's pens for calligraphy, again allowing for thick and thin strokes. Painting for laying down flat colors, and they're not so much flat as this has a lot of texture, but it allows you to paint in larger swaths of area. So there's gouache, there's a watercolor, oriental brush, dry brush, stucco. These are all really great brushes for adding texture in the artwork that I do. There's also the artistic brushes, again a lot of texture, trying to replicate some of the things that you'll see in the real world. There's also the air brushes, which are great for shadows and other texturizing effects. There are some textures in here as well, like the grid texture and decimals and diagonal and woods. There's abstract textures in here, charcoals, which are fantastic for a bit more of a traditional art feel. There's also different elements like water and oceans if you use this a lot for perhaps background illustration and things like that. And then I have a bunch of imported brushes as well, halftones and brushes from other YouTubers like Every Tuesday. There's brushes from actual artists and illustrators that have been able to get from Gumroad and things like that. So there's lots of stuff that you can do with these. I'm going to keep it really simple though today because I want to get us at least going so we get used to the process, and then you can dive deeper in terms of working with Procreate in general after you do this class. So now that we're done with the brushes, I want to go through the icons towards the gallery area. The arrow is literally the selection arrow. You can select items on your page and you can rotate them. You can flip them. I always suggest that when you do your select your bicubic or select your interpolation, which is that little circle with kind of like the grid inside of it, and make sure you select bicubic so that you don't have to encounter any issues with pixelation as you're working. Next to the direct selection arrow is the freehand selection. This allows you to use your Apple Pencil to draw the selection that you are creating rather than just selecting the whole item. You can select something specific, and again, if you take your 3 fingers, drag down on your screen, you'll get this little pop-up, and copy, cut, copy and paste, and then again, if you double tap with your fingers, you can undo. If we go into that little magic wand icon, that is our adjustments icon, you're able to adjust the opacity, add some Gaussian blur, which is really great for shadows. You can use perspective blur, you can sharpen items. This is actually really great if you pull in photos into Procreate, but again, this also works really well with illustration. You can liquefy items, you can clone them, you can adjust your color balance, your hue, saturation, and brightness. And again, if you want to undo, you just have to double tap. And then if we go next to the adjustments, you'll get that little wrench icon, and these are your actions. This is where you will save and share your files. We will specifically be using the share function, and we will be sharing as a PNG. You can also add a file. So say, for example, perhaps you're working from an image, like a reference image. You can insert a file or a photo. You can take a photo with your iPad. You can add text. And if you add text, what's nice is you can actually edit the style, and you can change it to whatever fonts you have loaded onto your iPad. You can change the different styles from regular, italic, bold. You can change the size, the kerning, the tracking, the leading, your baseline, and again, same with opacity. And you can also change your attributes. So if you want it to be left aligned or right aligned or centered. If you hit done, it'll take you out of there. Go back to your wrench icon. Again, you can use that selection tool, and you can, instead of doing the 3 finger swiping down, you could also just go to your wrench tool and hit cut or copy, and then you can hit paste and it'll put it back. If you go to your canvas, it'll allow you to crop and resize your canvas. If you're working on creating GIFs, you can turn on your animation assist. You can turn on the drawing guide if you would like to have a grid. You could also flip your canvas horizontally or vertically, and also you can click on your canvas information and it'll show you how big your canvas is and what the DPI is. I always like to work at least 300 DPI or more. It'll also show you the number of layers you can create in your file, your type of color profile that you're working with, the video settings, and the statistics of the track time that Procreate has been recording your work. If you go to your preferences, you can change your interface from light to dark. You could also change the right hand interface. I like to turn it off because I'm a righty and I tend to work very much on that side, so it's easier for me to have my interface to the left. You could also change your undo delay, your selection mask visibility. You can edit your pressure curve. I like to keep it just as it is though. And then you can also get help. You can restore purchases. You can get the Procreate handbook. There's advanced settings that you can go to into your actual settings on your iPad. And that is basically the interface that you'll be working with in Procreate.